Pollinators. 90% of flowering plants worldwide depend upon them, and they support the production of 87 of the world's leading food crops. Pollinators are essential to life on Earth. Because they perform an essential ecosystem service, pollination, they underpin healthy diets, they drive biodiversity, and they're essential for healthy ecosystems. Without pollinators, we wouldn't have many of our fruit and vegetables like almonds, avocados, apples, even vegetables like carrots and onions. This presentation is about what each of us can do to help pollinators in their local landscape. Whether you're a large-scale commercial farmer or have a small back garden or terrace, each of us can take simple steps to support pollinators in our environment and help bring back the buzz. To get us started, here is Dr. Anna Carracan. Anna is a botanist and a beekeeper from the Western District of Victoria, and Anna is also a Wheen Bee Foundation ambassador.
Welcome everyone to today's presentation here about powerful pollinators. On behalf of the Wheen Bee Foundation, I'm excited to share with you, and also on behalf of our project partners, the Powerful Pollinators Project, bringing back the buzz with the Powerful Pollinators Guide. So what is the Powerful Pollinators Guide? Well, it's a powerful resource for you to bring back the buzz. That is, in encouraging and sustaining insect pollinator populations on farms, across agricultural landscapes, and in your backyard and garden. It's about giving you the knowledge and the capacity for creating havens for pollinators in small spaces and across large landscapes. It's about connecting you with your patch or your paddock, your local insect life, and bringing back the buzz by choosing local plants that will support insect pollinators in your area. And in today's presentation, we will be introducing to you the why, the what, and the how, and explaining and sharing key points. Specifically, the importance of pollinators. Why are they so vital? Supporting pollinators. What can we do to encourage and protect insect pollinators? And using the Powerful Pollinators Guide. So how do you go about creating an oasis for pollinators, whether it's on your farm or in your garden? Pollinators literally are the littlest things that run the world. So in the first section of today's presentation, the importance of pollinators, they are the canaries in the coal mine, whether it's in our productive or agricultural environments or our native ecosystems. Honeybees, native bees, and many other insect species provide a wealth of services to enable food production and to support and perpetuate native vegetation communities and habitats in our natural environments. Clearly, pollinators are important. 1 in every 3 bites of food you eat requires a pollinator to bring it to you. And the interconnectedness of insects across our native and productive landscapes is incredibly important. So we'll be sharing with you how to enhance these landscapes and environments to promote insect pollinators. In the context of Australian agriculture, bees, native bees and honeybees are incredibly important. They make a massive contribution to our food and fibre businesses. The value of pollinators can be seen in terms of quantity of production, and it's really apparent in the benefit that they give to food crops and agricultural systems. In this slide, I will be showing you that there are many foods that are highly or totally dependent upon pollinators, such as honeybees, to yield a crop, and those that are somewhat less dependent on pollinators but benefit from their contribution in terms of increased yields. So in the table on the left, you can see that there are many crops that are totally bee dependent, such as almonds and apples, avocados, blueberries, to name a few. There are also crops that are grown for seed production, and examples of that include carrot, celery, and even mustard and onion seeds. Broadacre crops that you may not think of as fruit necessarily, but still develop from a flower, are crops such as canola, which is enhanced by pollinator interaction, and that is grown to produce seed in order to make oil. The massive contribution and economic value of honeybees to Australian agriculture is at least $14.2 billion annually. And that's matched by other insect pollinators and native bees. And if you contrast that to the value of honey and hive products, it's orders of magnitude greater. So you can see that in terms of requiring a pollinator to bring you food, it really is food for thought. The value of pollinators is also very, very clearly indicated in terms of the quality of produce. And it's here where we talk about the degree of pollination that may occur in a flower with or without the contribution of visitation by a pollinator. And it's incomplete pollination versus complete, because it's all about the process of pollination in a flower. So pollination is how flowers are fertilized and become fruits, the seeds contained in them to grow into the next generation of plants. Optimal pollen deposition gives rise to the best fertilization rates of a flower's ovules or female parts by the pollen grains, which are the male gametes. And this in turn increases seed set and seed quality, and also fruit tissue quantity and quality, because in fruit producing plants, seeds that are produced in the fruit give off hormones that stimulate fruit tissue development. So adequate pollination is needed to set seed and produce high quality marketable fruit. That then commands a higher price at market and also a greater appreciation by the consumer of the perceived appeal and edibility of that fruit. And you can see in this slide that there are a number of images that indicate that concept really clearly. On the left, we have a tomato fruit, and the image above shows a completely pollinated tomato fruit with fully developed seeds, lots of pulp, and nice, thick, fleshy interior, compared to the somewhat withered and less filled interior of that fruit, of the incompletely pollinated tomato at the bottom. Similarly, in watermelons, which is the images in the center of the screen, the top image shows a completely pollinated watermelon fruit with lots of pips inside and very rich, luscious looking flesh and very visually appealing. Contrast that to the watermelon below, which has a rather insipid looking pale pink flesh that is far less visually attractive and just a lot less appealing as an edible item. Cucumbers are another fruit which develops from a flower that requires pollination. And you can also see in these two images on the right the differences in the quality of the fruit from an incompletely pollinated cucumber to a completely pollinated cucumber flower. There's all sorts of differences in terms of shape, texture, colour of fruits that are fully or incompletely pollinated. And sometimes if flowers are not completely pollinated, it can be due to factors such as too few insects in the environment or stressors or negative effects such as application of chemicals at inappropriate times that may harm the pollinators. So why bring back the buzz? Well, in a nutshell, pardon the pun, more pollinators mean more pollination services for crops and native flora. And so by understanding the needs of pollinators, our invisible, hardworking workforce, and providing for these needs, insect populations will increase in your environment and be ready to help pollinate your crops and gardens for free. So as part of using the Powerful Pollinators Guide, it's great to understand a bit more about bee-friendly practices and principles and how systems and resources interact in the environment and how you can build upon them in the best way possible to provide basics for bees and other insect pollinators. The starting checklist, if you like, includes providing flowers and habitat, that's a place to live, extending flowering times so that you have literally a smorgasbord of forage across the calendar year. And so you're looking at extending flowering times as often as possible across different species. Providing clean water and a safe water supply for bees and other insects to visit that is separate to water sources that you may need for your house or garden. And if visitation from pollinators causes disruption, it's great to provide a separate water supply. And having an impact on the environment that is as minimal as possible in terms of application of chemical and chemical load in that habitat. So I'll introduce to you some examples of those as we talk through the next few slides, and just give you some more foundation into understanding bee-friendly practices and principles. So in an agricultural and food production context, and this is often across large swathes of local landscapes, when we look at crops and native vegetation and supporting pollinators in these environments, it's important to consider what that landscape looks like. And here in Australia, in the main, some of our crops that require pollinator visitations are grown across large tracts of land in a monocultural setting, so one crop species at a time. And this may be on single farms, or on a particular farm you may have a mix of grazing and cropping systems. Sometimes you might see shelter belts adjacent to paddocks that are planted out with native species or introduced hedging species for shelter and shade for livestock. But these plantings also provide a starting point to build pollinator habitat in those environments, and particularly where it's adjacent to cropping systems where pollinators can be of excellent service. And unless we have these diverse environments either adjacent to or amongst these cropping or grazing areas, then the ability of pollinators to contribute to those systems is limited. So ideally, and you can see this from looking at this slide, there are all sorts of different species types and structures and diversities adjacent to and amongst these cropping systems that you can see here. So there's two distinct crops in the picture on the right, a grain and a broadleaf crop. In the background, there are some trees planted for shade and shelter, some of which are native species. But key to what you can see in this image is the proliferation of various species of wildflowers and herbs that give space and refuge for native pollinators when the crops may or may not be either growing or have been harvested or absent from those systems. So in amongst these areas of wildflowers and diverse habitat, There's places to nest, to take refuge, to feed and to breed. And the photograph on the left shows a bee on a brassica crop, such as a mustard or a canola. And in these species, honeybees particularly are key to enhancing pollination and therefore seed set and yield. So it's all about creating diversity and maximising niches, habitats and places of refuge for pollinators in agricultural systems. And this certainly applies at a smaller scale in urban and city environments as well. In terms of practices that support pollinators, it's useful to think of a hierarchy of considerations that's sometimes called integrated management techniques or integrated pest management, IPM, and think about the actions that you may take in trying to control pests that may be either beneficial to or damaging to pollinators. So the hierarchy of principles and decision making relates to avoiding if it's at all possible, the use of conventional pesticides. And you can see that at the top of the triangle in the diagram. It's best to start with proactive practices, which may be creating enhanced habitats for beneficial bugs and pollinators, practicing various methods of cultivation and weed or pest control that is not chemical based, and also using natural controls such as organically certified products and other biocontrol agents in preference to chemical controls, particularly because a number of chemicals in the insecticide, fungicide and herbicide categories have been demonstrated to be detrimental to beneficial pollinators. And so with those principles in mind, it's time to talk about using the guide and putting some steps in place, understanding those principles and getting into creating your own oasis, whether it's on the farm or in the garden, for pollinators to be the best they can be in your environment. And key to that is a number of understandings that I will introduce you to. First of all, it's about learning about your landscape. There are also benefits to learning and discovering more about your local flora and what grows best and naturally in your area. And then having a think about a calendar year or the steps you'll need to take in order to start sourcing plants and preparing a site or a selection of your garden for planting. And in doing so, bringing back to those practices that support pollinators and staying away from the spray as much as you can to create that beautiful oasis for pollinators. So in learning about your landscape, it's basically saying that all things are connected and that we have species of flora and fauna and areas that are connected or separated in the landscape, and patches of habitat that may be high or low in quality and extensive or restricted in quantity. And all those things come together to make up your local landscape, whether it's single trees scattered across a paddock or hundreds of hectares of wet, cool, temperate rainforest, or little strips of remnant grassland and wildflower herb fields along a roadside. It's all part of your local landscape and the flora that make it up and the fauna that live in that native vegetation. So understanding what vegetation types grow in your region is really interesting and really informative in helping you learn what will grow best in your area. And it could be to do with the climate, geology, all sorts of things that define your district or your suburb or your local government area. And that then allows you to see what kind of vegetation grows there. So it could be, as in the image in the upper left of the slide, multi-stemmed eucalypts, characteristic of the Mallee region in, say, northwest Victoria across into southeast South Australia. It could be cool temperate rainforest with big tall eucalypts and mossy paths and tree ferns that you see in the lower left-hand image. And that's very characteristic of a lot of parts of far southern Australia, such as in the Otways or in parts of Western Tasmania. Or it could be sort of an open heathy woodland and characterised by more shrubby, woody plants, including these very elegant and dramatic austral grass trees. So there's all sorts of things that come together in terms of vegetation to characterise your region. And with a good understanding of your native flora, you can also come to learn about the native fauna, specifically the insect populations that call your part of the world home. And there are amazing guides online and books that you can seek out to become a citizen scientist and undertake identification of various bugs and beetles, butterflies, flies, wasps and bees that live in your part of the world, or that are possibly living in your part of the world but haven't been seen for some time, and there's an opportunity to attract them back into your area. And these little winged insects and little creepy crawlies and little critters do best when they can access as much of the local environment as possible. And here's where we talk about patches and connectivity. It's all about joining the dots and making it a happy place for your pollinators to live. And by making different areas as accessible as possible, you're creating great habitat. And it might be that some species of pollinator love little strips of vegetation that they can flit in and out of that has lots of edges, so they can access grassland or cropland adjacent and fly back in to these small patches. Or they might like large blocks of vegetation that provides an excellent refuge and protection from predators. And understanding different species' needs is a great way to better design plantings and creating connectivity in your area. And that will then give you the difference between a good habitat and a great habitat for pollinators. To learn to understand your landscape from a quality and quantity point of view, and to put your bee goggles on, so to speak, and see the landscape with a bug's eye view. And a classic way to illustrate this concept is to look at these two pictures here. And the one on the right is quite visually stunning and very engaging and appealing to a human being. And the one on the left, you look at it and you think, oh, it's quite majestic, but it's a bit scruffy and a bit untidy looking, and you sort of literally can't see the wood for the trees. And from a human point of view, we're probably less attracted to that. But in terms of habitation by insects and other native fauna, the environment on the left presents an amazing habitat. It's got a range of vegetation, species types, from ground covers to shrubs to trees. It's got great connectivity and it's not weedy. And from a pollinator point of view, that's great habitat. So sometimes we have to be considerate of not just looking for a nice view, but looking for a good habitat as well. And then when we can connect great habitat together, we not only have quality, but we have quantity in the landscape. And that's awesome, which allows you to create an amazing oasis for pollinators. You will be able to, in using the guide and understanding the principles that we've introduced here today, bring a beautiful rainbow of nectar and pollen forage into your environment that caters for a range of species, allows them to feed and breed and nest and rest in that environment, and do so without the threatening processes of management techniques that may have a negative impact on their survival and their thriving in the landscape. So I very excitedly and enthusiastically invite you to bring back the buzz. Visit the Wheen Bee Foundation website and download a free copy of the Powerful Pollinators Guide so that you can be part of bringing back the buzz. And here's a snapshot of what's inside the guide. You can see an amazing front cover that shows a native bee representative of the different regions for which we've produced Powerful Pollinators guides so far. There are fold-out panels that include how to identify and know your different pollinators, and an amazing species list inside that gives you information about all sorts of locally appropriate native plants from which to select to create your oasis. Everything from the tallest trees to the prettiest wildflowers and the tiniest ground covers. Things that flower at different times of the year, whether you're looking for winter colour or a bit of summer sensation, and flowers that are anything from whites and creams through to vibrant purples and hot reds. It's all there. And then on the right-hand side of the fold-out panel, we have the kinds of sites that those species grow best in. Is it a dry patch of soil in full sun, or something that's quite wet and shady? And the different insect pollinators that are likely to visit those particular species of plants, so that if you need to, you can hone in on species to attract certain pollinator species that might need help in your region. So get on board and bring back the buzz. And you can use these guides to help you pick out the right flowers that flower at the right time. And alongside that, clean water for your little bee friends and your insect allies, and some insect hotels or growing and developing vegetation that provides permanent nesting habitat and breeding places for these amazing insects.
We hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and if you'd like to have a planting guide developed for your bioregion, please get in contact by giving us a call or sending us an email.